The Python, I'll swallow your soul. Welcome to Hey You Guys podcast, and this week we watched 1987's The Evil Dead 2, starring Bruce Campbell, who delivers an over-the-top acting performance that I am sure even Nicolas Cage himself would be proud of. Whilst its predecessor flirted heavily with dark humour, this time around, director Sam Raimi leaned all the way into it, with even some of its more horrifying, violent moments coming across as nothing more than slapstick. This, however, gives us one of this film's greatest scenes, in which our hero Ash has to contend with his demonically possessed hand, tormenting him throughout the cabin. But when all is said and done, can we say that The Evil Dead 2 serves as a rare example in which a sequel is better than the film that came before it? I, for one, feel that this film surpasses the original and makes 38-year-old me as happy now as when 13-year-old me watched it back in the day.
Good intro. Solid intro, mate.
Yeah.
No, definitely the first take.
Yeah.
100%. Well, one of the first things you say, and I guess it's one of the more contentious issues about this film, is whether it is a sequel or is it a remake? Because people seem to be arguing about this, and I think there's actually a really clear answer.
It is, yeah. Well, so when I first wrote out my intro, I had sequel/remake. But as I look more into this, it is a sequel. And the reason why you have the first 5 minutes different, the first 5-10 minutes different, because even last week when I said we're going to be watching it and it probably could be a remake, it's because they didn't actually have the rights to show anything from the last film. So
yeah. That still sat with New Line Cinema, but because it went to De Laurentiis company, or whoever it was, who bought up the rights, they suddenly had to reshoot. But that my point being is like, and I think actually Bruce Campbell described it rather perfectly as a requel, which I think is actually bang on, because I think it's both. The first 6 minutes of this film is a remake of the first film. They just kind of like retrofit it basically, so that they take out the additional characters, they make it just about Ash and Linda. But yeah, it's like I guess so much of this film is a satire both of the genre and of the first film. And I'm not sure if you can have any more of a satire than turning your first film into a 6-minute movie at the start of the sequel. But that's exactly what it does. And one of the points that I think Bruce Campbell actually made himself is that if you go from the end of the first film and then you skip, I think it is 6 or 7 minutes ahead, directly to the point where after Ash has rather, without any sense of remorse, chopped his girlfriend's head off. So he chops his girlfriend's head off. He walks out of the cabin. And at that point, you're having the exact same scene at the end of Evil Dead when the evil first-person evilness comes after him. And then he gets shot through the forest. So if you cut out those first 6 minutes, which is basically a more simplified remake of the first film, it just carries on directly where the first film left off, only, as you already mentioned, with more slapstick fun. Because this is, I mean, to my mind, I think it's got to be one of the strangest sequels of all time. And, despite it being a requel, whatever, the vast majority of this movie is a sequel. But it's not only one of the strangest sequels, but it has to be the second part of one of the oddest movie trilogies of all time. It has to be, right?
Well, a movie trilogy that takes what the previous did and totally runs with it in different ways. And we'll get to the third film in Legacy. But my God, what a strange trilogy. But I did want to mention something that you said at the beginning of what you were speaking about just then, whereas it follows on differently from the first film. Is the first film did that as well, mind, because the first film was actually, they did a short called Within the Woods, which actually let them get the budget to do Evil Dead. So they took what they did with Within the Woods, and then they moved that to Evil. So they seem to be, at least for these first two films, and Evil Dead 2 particularly, they seem to be taking what they did before and
iterating on it.
Yeah, iterating on it like completely, because Within the Woods then became Evil Dead 1 became Evil Dead 2. And like you said, cut out the first 7 minutes, you could go straight from number 1 to number 2 and it'd be seamless.
Yeah. It really is a follow. I mean, basically, a big part of this, again, is the fact that it moved to De Laurentiis, who was actually talked into financing this film by Stephen King, who he's working with on Maximum Overdrive. And he was one of the big fans. I know Maximum Overdrive. Right?
I love that statement. Stephen King is working with somebody on his directorial debut, which is Maximum Overdrive. And he talks a guy into funding what is going to be classed as one of, and I'm sorry, I will say it, one of the best horror films from that era. Because I am going to go out there now. We're not going to wait till the end. I'm going to go out there and say I love this film, and I class this film as one of the best horror films.
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with pretty much everything you're saying, but I mean, it's not a horror. I mean, there are quote unquote scary bits, but this is more Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin with chainsaws. I mean, this movie, I mean, obviously it really did become like Ash versus the Evil Dead and the show. I mean, this is the Ash show, like 100%. And his performance is turned up to 11. Of course, it might not be everyone's cup of tea because he really is swinging for the fences, you know, Three Stooges, but with demon style. Like, there's no two ways about it. But physical comedy and to do it well is one of the hardest things to get right in the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, he absolutely slays it in this. So I don't think I've seen anyone go through the ringer quite like Bruce Campbell does in this film. Like, don't get me wrong, most of it is him kicking his own ass. But the way in which he commits to the role, you're like, God, that can't have been fun. You know, kind of in the same way, say, wrestling. Like, you know, wrestling's set up, but you still have to throw yourself through a table. You still got to throw yourself off the top rope. Like, you know, yes, it's kind of a practice way of kind of putting yourself at harm, but you're still putting yourself in harm. And he absolutely does it to the nth degree. I'm sure if this gets made in 2021 without a massive kind of insurance bill associated with his name. But
there's a couple of things I want to mention. The first being, oh my God, back then Bruce Campbell was a handsome man.
Well, this is another point of contention in my house, because I was making the point that Bruce Campbell has all the ingredients of like the perfect movie star. He's got the strong chin, he's got the piercing eyes and stuff. But somehow it's like everything was turned up one step too high. So he almost, to me, looks like a caricature of the most handsome movie star in the world. My wife actually said he's somehow less than the sum of his parts, which I thought was a perfect way to put it, because he's got all the ingredients, but somehow it doesn't quite fit together as it should. The only thing I could think of was like, he's like a movie star created by committee. You know, kind of like a camel is a horse created by committee. Yeah. Bruce Campbell is a movie star created by... It's like, no, we need a bigger jaw. We need a stronger jaw. No, he needs to be more intense. He needs to be taller, stronger. And it's like he's got all the parts, but somehow, and perhaps it is his persona, and obviously a part of it is, you know, if you put him in a kind of prestige movie back in 1987, and you had like a top-tier director kind of, you know, lighting him the right way, making him look like, maybe it would have worked. But of course, a big part of this film, and to his credit, he really leans into it. The whole film is about making him look like a fucking idiot.
Oh yeah.
And don't get me wrong, he's the coolest idiot of all time. You can't not be cool with a chainsaw for a hand and a sawn-off shotgun. But I'm not sure if there's ever been a character in history who walks the line so successfully between super cool and an absolute loser. Like, he does it so perfectly, so perfectly.
The other thing we've said a few times, usually with Arnie films, how Arnie's face is like rubber and he can do some fantastic facial acting. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, he's got nothing on Bruce Campbell in this film.
No, I would make the argument that Arnie does it by accident. Like, it's just Arnie's face. And again, I'm not sure Bruce Campbell's face is always making these shapes. He spends so much of this film screaming. I totally forgot. Like 30% of this film is him kicking his own ass. Another 30% is him screaming. And then you throw in a little bit of narrative, a couple of deadites and some additional characters who may or may not need to be there. But yeah, it's just one of the things you can't escape. Bruce Campbell absolutely is this film. It's, the first film was an ensemble where he ended up obviously surviving, being the star of the film. But this film, and returning to it, what surprised me was the energy of the film and how quickly both the viewer and poor Ash are thrown into the deep end. There's no build-up.
No.
It's mayhem from minute one. I have never seen a film accelerate into mayhem as quickly as this film ever in my life.
And you said it. You said because he's the star of this film and it's the Bruce Campbell show or the Ash Williams show. Mm-hmm. That's why you've got to basically bring in the cannon fodder. You have to bring in the red shirts, using a Star Trek reference, which is the people that are going to end up coming in for no other reason than to just get possessed and get killed in hilarious ways. I'm not so sure there's that much blood in a human body for when, what was his name? The Bobby Joe's boyfriend.
Oh, not Jack. Is it Jack? Jake.
Who?
Yeah.
I still question the fact, even in what I'm guessing is the Deep South, because Bobby Joe, how those two ended up together. But okay.
Well,
again, in a human body for that much to come out of the cellar.
I mean, it's absurd. And it is one of the great things about this film is that rather than having, like, you know, usually when you think of like horror movies and let's be clear, this is a satire both of itself and of horror films, but very much a satire of horror films from the 70s rather than the 80s. And one of the things that gives it, like, you know, when you think of horror films in the 80s, you think of characters, you think of Freddy Krueger, you think of Jason Voorhees, etc., etc. With this, well, they're only references Deadites very much at the end of the film when it goes to medieval times. It's just the evil or whatever you want to call it at this point. But it's so ambiguous that it allows for the most imaginative set pieces, the most imaginative action, the most imaginative possessions and horror in movie history, because there's no like, oh, well, that character wouldn't do this, or this character has a set amount of power. It's just evil. It's just this ambiguous evilness. So it allows them to just be like, all right, let's have all the blood in the world. All right, this guy has green blood. This person has blue blood. And I know that is, and we might get around to it later, linked to the whole rating things, whether it was going to be X-rated or R-rated. Yeah. But I mean, I think at that point, you've got enough red blood for a bit of blue or green blood not to be the issue. But it just allows Sam Raimi imagination, as it were, to absolutely run wild with this film. And like you said, yeah, it makes no sense that 10,000 gallons of blood shoot out of the cell. It makes no sense at all. But in the context of this film, and they do set the scene, set the kind of tone in that regard, is that you don't know what's real and what's not. Yeah. It's like, you know, those early scenes with Linda, with Ash and Linda, where it's like how much is in his head and how much is actually the Deadites. And sorry, I will refer to them as Deadites. It's just set in my head. Yeah. So you can totally get away with these absurdly visual scenes because, again, they're as much messing with their heads as they are actually possessing people and physically fucking with them, as it were. It's like, was his hand really possessed or did they get in his head? Of course, his hand was actually possessed because it ended up killing, was it Annie at the end? I mean, the hand thing. Again, can you get away with that in many films? I mean, it's basically Cousin It, if Cousin It was a fucking dick. But it's, you know, I think it was, like 10, 15 minutes into the film, he's being attacked by his own hand.
And that was fantastic. And that was improvised by Ash. That whole fight scene with his hand was improvised by Bruce Campbell. And I want to actually, in honor of last week, where you brilliantly, in commas, conveyed Frank Langella's performance to A Night Out in Aberystwyth.
Yeah, that was off the cuff, by the way. That was genius. I'm going to stand by it.
Bruce Campbell's performance in this is like my recent visit to the doctor's office. Right?
All right, here we go. Strap yourself in.
Yeah. You start off expecting some bad news. You don't know what's going to happen. As time goes on, then you're speaking to the doctor and you're thinking, oh, you know what? This is actually turning out pleasant. It's a nice visit. You're getting some good news. Bruce Campbell's delivering a great performance in this. And by the end of it, you may or may not have had a finger up your bum, depending on your age.
Oh, okay, yeah, fair enough. I often compare Evil Dead 2 and Bruce Campbell's performance as Ashwin as a finger up the bum, an unexpected finger up the bum. Yeah. I mean, for some people, you know, they might enjoy it, but if you're in a doctor's office and you don't expect it, I can imagine that comes as quite the shock. Yeah, a real mixed bag. But I mean, the thing is, right, if we are going to go back to Ash, and it's something I kind of touched upon with the whole, you know.
I will say, from now on, I am going to try and compare everyone's performance to some random thing that happened in life.
Yeah, I think we should. Every single film or every character performance should have some kind of comparison point. I'm not sure if we're going to be a Weekend Away in Aberystwyth or a finger up the bum, but, you know, we'll keep going with it all the same, you know. We can turn it into one of the sections of the podcast.
Yeah.
We'll do soundtrack, video games, legacy, and then something horrific that's happened to you recently. So, yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah.
But,
sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying, like, when you think of, or certainly when I thought of horror films growing up in the 80s, you always think of the villains, of course.
Yeah.
And there's not actually that many standout heroes. And I was thinking, is Ash Williams the greatest horror hero of all time. Now, the only one, because, maybe there's like Dr. Sam Loomis in Halloween. He's pretty good. Nada in They Live. Is it how I pronounce it? Nada in They Live? Roddy Piper's character.
I thought he was just Drifter. I thought his name was just Drifter.
I thought he had a name. Oh, maybe I've got that wrong. Drifter. We'll go with Drifter. There's Nancy in Nightmare on Elm Street. And, historically, of course, there's like Van Helsing as performed by Peter Cushing in particular in the Hammer horror films.
Would you?
I don't think any of those.
Sorry, would you have called Sam Lewis? Wouldn't it? Sam Loomis, Dr. Loomis. Wouldn't it have been Jamie Lee Curtis's character as the hero?
I'm not sure if she's maybe, but I when I think of it, I always think of Sam Loomis, but maybe it is Jamie Lee Curtis. She is another one.
You're correct. I'm wrong. He is a Drifter, but his name is John Nada. You're right.
Okay, no, fair enough. Yeah. I mean, and again, Jamie Lee Curtis is maybe one of them, but the only one I can think, and for some odd reason, I saw it on a few lists when I checked it out, was Ellen Ripley, which makes sense, but I think it only makes sense for Alien. I don't think it makes sense for the rest of the film.
Because the other films are not horror films. They're not classic horror. You get action, you get thriller, you get whatever Alien Resurrection is.
Yeah, there's horror elements.
Yeah.
But it's not horror.
But no,
but I would say the thing is the first film is a horror film. Like, it's a very highbrow, incredibly well-directed horror film, but the first one was 100% a horror film. So I would say it's like a toss-up. And again, you can't talk about more, different ends of the spectrums in terms of performances. But I would put Bruce Campbell as Ash Williams like up there with Ellen Ripley as the greatest heroes in horror history.
Yeah.
Like, without question.
Because, I mean, again, he's got an iconic look as well.
And that's one of the most important things. You
say Ash Williams, not many people might know Ash Williams, but if you say the dude from Evil Dead, you're gonna get Chainsaw Hand, boom.
Yeah. You know he works unlike Ellen Ripley, and again, it's the nature of the film. It's a very different vibe. Ash Williams works in the same way that Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger works, in so much that you could just put a silhouette of that character. Yeah. And people know, and it's that iconic. Like, you put a silhouette with the glove of Freddy, that Jason Voorhees with the machete, all that jazz. If you put Ash Williams next to him with the chainsaw and the fucking shotgun, it's just like, yeah, everyone knows exactly who that is. Like you said, even if you haven't seen the film, that's how iconic he's become. Like, I'm not sure there's many actors out there who are so kind of closely related and linked to one character as Bruce Campbell is with Ash. But if you're going to be linked to one character and one performance, fuck, man, it might as well be this dude. Yeah, and, as much, the TV show's good, the other film's good, but Evil Dead is the crown jewel. There's no two ways about it.
I totally agree. I absolutely love him in this. Sorry, I was just looking. I think I might have found a list, but what's quite funny about this list was sorry, the list disappeared. I found it was quite the greatest movie horror survivors, not heroes. Like, you couldn't find an actual hero.
See, that's the thing. I don't think of him as like Ellen Ripley's a survivor. Like, she's that. Jamie Lee Curtis is a survivor. And maybe that's why when I thought of it, I thought of, to give myself a bit of an out here, why I thought of Dr. Sam Loomis. I don't think of him as a survivor. They're more kind of, I don't know, aggressive. They're more the aggressor in these films kind of thing. Yeah. Like, yes, of course, a big part of his performance is his surviving. But, you're not just surviving if you've got a fucking chainsaw for a hand and you're running around with a sawn-off shotgun. It's a different kind of character. So, yeah, I would argue that Ellen Ripley is in that category of the best horror survivors. But then if you're on about heroes, because it is a different vibe, and I feel like you have to have a different kind of film, then, yeah, Ash Williams is tough to beat. And let's be clear, Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2 is a very different beast from your traditional horror film, if it is indeed a horror.
So let's unpack this, right? In regards to the actual film itself and the setting. Mm-hmm. First of all, he's squatting. But how did he know about the cabin? Is my big question. Because he knew where the tool shed was. He knew where the obviously the chainsaw was going to be in the tool shed. Things but he knew the cabin was there, but apparently he'd never been there before. Or is this somewhere that he takes all his conquests? Do you know what I mean?
Perhaps. I mean, let's be clear. In those first couple of minutes before he has to behead poor Linda, Like, he's a suave operator. I mean, he's cheesy as fuck. But like with
you say, I'm a man and you're a woman. Like, what the
Well, you know, I'm doing that with unofficial air quotes. I mean, you know, when he's playing the piano, it's cheesy as fuck. Yeah. But he looks like a man who's done this before. It's not his first rodeo, should we put it that way. On the one hand, it's easy to just say, it doesn't matter. It's like everything is geared towards getting to the action as quickly as possible. And why he's at the cabin, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, it's kind of almost a token gesture just to rejig the first film, just to give you an excuse to be like, we don't want to have to explain him coming back to the cabin. We don't even really want to explain why he's coming to the cabin in the first place. We just want him in the cabin. That's all that matters. So let's just get him there and get the action going and get that hand possessed and get some chainsaws going as quickly as possible. But if we are going to take it seriously, I suspect, yes, he knows of this cabin. He doesn't know whose it is, but to me, at least, it feels like he's been there before as a notorious shagger. Yeah. And, you know, he's, I don't think he's played that song on the piano. He's delivered those lines. I don't think this is all off the cuff. I don't think it's the first time. I think he knows exactly what the fuck he's doing because, you know, Ash is a dirty bastard, I think.
Yeah, he seemed to know exactly where he was running as well when he was running away from the evil. Like to find the in-between space between the walls. He seemed to find that perfectly as he was running. But you said about getting to the cabin. And I know, obviously, low-budget film, and I know that it could take a few people out. It was probably more in bigger budget films, like I said, because when we watched Aliens, the model of the ship coming into land on LV-426, that kind of took me out. But when the miniature crossed the bridge, that was definitely a miniature. There's no two ways about it. A miniature car going across the bridge.
Oh yeah. I mean, it couldn't have been any. I was actually thinking to the point, like, was it done purposefully? Is it like purposefully hokey?
It looked great for this film. Like it just a word I use a lot and I get mocked for quite a lot is charming. If I don't want to say something's brilliant, but I don't want to say it's crap, it's charming.
I think it is charming. Yeah, I think it is. I think they knew exactly what they were doing. I don't think I think they could have found a bridge if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and again, apologies if we're stepping on facts, but the fact of the matter is, like, Sam Raimi wanted to make basically the Army of Darkness. He wanted to make a film like where Ash went back in time to medieval times and fought the Deadites. Yeah. Of course, he got to do that with Army of Dead 2, but the only way he got the budget for this was to go back and basically make another film very similar to the first one.
This was all filmed in a school gymnasium. So
yeah, which is insane. Yeah. But I mean, and again, it speaks to the budget, but you do get those little hints of that obsession with Ray Harryhausen in particular, in terms of his visual style, that stop motion style, in both that scene and later on when Ash is fighting one of the Deadites. It's very much, and of course, the scene where Linda comes back and he's having a dream supposedly, and she starts dancing and her head's rolling off. It's all pure Ray Harryhausen. It's almost like, I'm going to have my cake and eat it. It's like, okay, I can't do that film yet, but I'm still going to have those little nods to cinema that I love.
Yeah.
And, that's part and parcel of a Sam Raimi film. I mean, Sam Raimi really is, if you take out the Harryhausen kind of nods, which are plentiful, it's like Sam Raimi's like a total auteur. Like, all of his films, they have that something about them. You watch them and straight away, like, you just know the way he moves the camera, the way he speeds up. Like, the only other person I know who uses so many tricks in camera, not special effects, but kind of like, I'm going to speed up the frames. The way they move the character. The only one who comes close is maybe George Miller in the Mad Max films. Yeah. A lot of that has kind of sped up frames and those kind of tricks to kind of deliberately bewilder the audience. But you go and watch his films, and whether it be Darkman, obviously Evil Dead, and even Spider-Man films, obviously he's had to rein it in, no pun intended. But it's you see like the Dr. Octopus scene from Spider-Man 2, where he wakes up on the bed and he's got the arms connected. That scene is pure Evil Dead. And even like, Drag Me to Hell, an oft, I think, kind of underrated and underseen Sam Raimi film. But he does have that auteur style about him. And I just love the fact that you go and you watch this film and it feels so unique. And the fact that he can have those Ray Harryhausen moments, he can have that ridiculous bridge in it. And it just feels like, yeah, this totally fits in this film because the film is totally ludicrous. So why the fuck not?
You mentioned Linda, and I inadvertently laughed harder than I should have when she came back from the dead. And her hair was a completely different color to the live.
Yeah, there are a few inconsistencies in this film, to say the least.
I'm not even denying. Obviously, it looks like claymation, and it's done well with everything. With again the budget that they've got, and I guess the limits that they have with technology back then and things like that. But my God, the fact that her hair was just completely different really took me out of the whole scene, and I just laughed harder than I should have. But
I mean,
you get to the point then when it goes back to, it always comes back in this film to Bruce Campbell's acting, because he's basically just acting with himself for most of this film. Well, for
a lot of it, yeah.
For most of the first part of this film, at least the first two acts, it's mainly just Ash on his own. But then when Linda disappears through the trees, which is a perfect effect, when she jumps behind the tree and she disappears, that looks great. Then when she jumps in and grabs his hand, and it's him clearly just holding the two hands there and headbutting.
Yeah, I mean, I
bloody window. It's fantastic.
I love that scene as well because I was like, it's so. And so much of it is like how you would react rather than how a movie star would react. Yeah. It's like, say you've just had to, put yourself in his position. He's just decapitated his girlfriend, yeah. He's initially, at least, pretty nonplussed about it, but he has his little moment when he screams, because he screams a lot in this film. But that his now decapitated girlfriend's head not only shows back up, but it bites him on the hand. And I love the way he reacts to his girlfriend's severed head biting his hand. It's the same way as if like a dog bit your hand. Like he just smashes it with everything. There's no grace to it. He starts smashing her head in with a book. He starts smashing it against a wall. It's like all the thought of whose head that is and what's going on goes out the window. Something is biting my hand and I want it off, and I'm going to do anything in my power to get it off.
That's fantastic as well. And I apologize because this is the medium of radio and not actual anything visual. But when he's there and he's going, work shed,
yeah. That'll sort her out. That'll sort this bitch out.
He's screaming, he's rolling around, then he just stops and he goes, work shed. And it's that
screaming again, yeah. And they do so much with, like, it's a really small set.
Yeah.
It's a really, even the work shed's tiny. But it's a short film, 85 minutes?
Yeah.
But 90% of it takes place in like a handful of very small rooms, and it just totally works and again, most of it is like the camera is very much in Ash's face, and you're just along for the journey. It's almost like you haven't got time to think about what's going on. You haven't got time to think about narrative because it's moving too quickly. It's like before you know it, something else is happening. So there's no air in this film. It's just relentless 85 minutes. The closest you get is that little scene with Annie and Bobby Joe and Jake and all that jazz on the bridge, and obviously there's like a slight cutaway which explains the book and the guy who was obviously her father who was at the cabin.
Professor.
But those scenes, those scenes last for like a minute or two max, and then it's back to the cabin and back to Ash,
Jake,
and that's it.
They went out of their way to show Jake's dog tags. So apparently this guy's a soldier.
Yeah.
I'm guessing Vietnam, considering it's the 80s. My God, he did not want to act like a soldier in this, did he? Everything was just full on panic and.
Well, I think that's fair enough. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Ash himself he freaks out a lot. Like you said, like that's a perfect example of that scene you had. It's like he spends 90% of that scene freaking the fuck out, but then has that moment of clarity when he's like tool shed. And it's like, he's just about able to get his shit together under the circumstances. And I think when a lot of people think of Ash nowadays, what they're actually thinking of is Ash in Army of Darkness.
Yes.
Because he's not actually particularly, other than the obviously groovy line, and he has one line where he says, eat this, before he shoots the possessed Henriette. No, it's not Henriette, it's the possessed blonde dude, like in the head once he's turned into a full-on deadite.
Swallow your soul, and he says swallow.
Yeah, swallow or whatever it is. Yeah. But he's not particularly quippy or anything in this film. It's more kind of, he's just reacting. Like, he's just like freaking out, but he's just got enough about him to be like, oh, well, I'm going to do something about this. Whereas everyone else is understandably like, what the fuck is happening? You know, it's just like, it's just pure mayhem. It's not even like you said, like, how do you prepare for it? Because it's not, oh, Freddy Krueger's after me or Jason's after me. It's just evil's at you, and anything can happen. Even Ash himself becomes possessed randomly throughout the film. And that feels like more just because they're like, listen, Bruce Campbell looked fucking awesome possessed. Let's just do it twice.
So I love...
Again, is there any reason other than the fact that it looks awesome? But he's really good as being possessed Ash.
He looks great in it. I love when he gets possessed the first time, the sun comes up, and that's like... So apparently this thing can't survive in sunlight at the moment, so it goes away. But then what takes him out of it the second time is the necklace he gave Linda. And it's just like, it looks like a skull as it's spinning around, and so even like the chain is in the shape of a skull, like on the floor. There's tons of visual nods. I think like Freddy Krueger's glove is in the shed. But that kind of actually takes our point away as well. So maybe he has taken previous conquests to this cabin, but it kind of looks like Linda was the one she was going to be the last conquest to this cabin. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I like to think that, you know, Linda had a special place in his heart. And of course, that gives more kind of impact to the fact that he had to behead her rather quickly and then had to have a fight with her.
Very well. I mean, I'm not saying go out and try it, but try with one swing decapitating somebody with a shovel.
A shovel, it's a big ask, isn't it? I mean, all I can think is maybe Deadites are kind of like, you know, like there's a zombie thing. You know, like the whole thing is like they're easier to like. In a lot of films, the idea is that, you know, their heads will come off much easier than a human's because they're kind of decrepit. So maybe there's something to that, perhaps.
Well,
I don't know.
That was from Dusk Till Dawn, wasn't it? That was a big thing in that, where they say that when they become vampires, they become quite squishy. Which
Well, let's just say Deadites are very squishy, you know. Squishy. So we'll go with that. But the thing is,
if you learn nothing else from this podcast, just learn that from now on, Deadites are squishy.
Yeah, they are 100% squishy. But the thing, it's a weird film in so much that, it is a horror, but is it a comedy horror or is it a horror comedy? I would almost argue for the most part, it's a comedy horror. I think it's more comedy than horror. The only real character, I think, which is truly horrific, especially, let's be clear, in 2021, where the effects seem even hokier, where even further, you know, they were a long way away from Harryhausen in 87. But in 2021, we're even further down the road. But I think probably Sam Raimi's brother, Ted Raimi, dressed as Henrietta, is probably the closest thing in this film to full-on horror that we get. And don't get me wrong, that character is truly unpleasant. I mean, there's a few kind of bits, I think, you can literally see his sweat, because supposedly they were filming in 100-degree heat, and that suit was not built for it. And you can see his sweat mixing with the makeup at times. And I think the bit when he's floating around, the back of his suit is ripped, and I think you can even see his red underwear, which seems ridiculous. But that character, for the most part, you know, being in the cellar, the gross look, you know, the bit when he's like slowly walking after Ashes, he's like, you know, desperately telling everyone, "Let me the fuck out of here," basically. Those bits are the closest we get to genuine horror. But even those bits are so closely followed by something ludicrous or a genuine laugh, you know? So I would actually argue that this probably is a comedy horror rather than a horror comedy.
So it's probably the bigger question being, was it always intended to be that? Or is just the way filming has progressed, the way audiences have progressed, things like that? Do we now see it as what you said, a horror comedy or a comedy horror? Or did they film it with those, as I said in my introduction, with those slapstick elements?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Because you only have to look at the two films in comparison. Again, we're very much in that this is a sequel, but it's a sequel with very similar scenes to the first one. There's no two ways about it. I mean, you know, if you look at the tree scene, for instance, in the first film, the tree film is massively disturbing. Like, she gets basically raped by a tree. She does. It is
should be on some sort of register. It's terrible.
It should be that tree should be going door to door in its local area, telling everyone it's pet harassed. but it's a genuinely disturbing scene. The first film is and regardless, you could go back and watch 1981's Evil Dead now, and it might, other than that scene, which is still quite disturbing, and it might all feel a little bit quaint, the same way that Friday the 13th Part 1 feels very quaint nowadays.
Yes.
But when you're watching them, you're still very aware that these are horror films. Whereas you watch this, it's 100% slapstick. Actually, I would say the tree scene is maybe one of the more disturbing, because the bits where the trees go into her face, it actually reminds me of the end of The Faculty, when Elijah Wood gets all the kind of spores,
those slug things going in and then popping back out. Yeah.
I always thought that was super gross, and there's an element of that to the tree scene in Evil Dead 2, but there's nothing as disturbing as what's in Evil Dead 1. And as I said, Bruce Campbell's never smashing plates over his head, and it couldn't be any more a Three Stooges setup. He's just a one stooge, that's it. But I would argue they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew they were making a slapstick comedy within the confines of a horror genre, and it might have been, the scary bits might have had more impact in 1987 for sure, but I would still argue that even then this was comedy horror rather than horror comedy.
So I might have confused this with myself or a cut that I've seen previously, or maybe even Idle Hands starring Jessica Alba. But was there a scene in this? Because I really can't remember in my latest watch. You said Three Stooges. Now, was there a scene where the possessed hand tried to do the Three Stooges eye poke and he blocked it?
No, I think that's in the Army of Darkness, because that is a thing. But I think you're mixing that up when he's fighting his evil self in Army of Darkness.
When his two-headed thing comes, and he's...
Yeah. And that is another one of those things, I mean, we kind of referenced it earlier, is that a lot of people, it's like when people think of Ash, they think of that famous scene where it's like, this is my boomstick and all that shit. Like that, I've seen posters of, fan-made posters of Evil Dead 2, where Ash is in that classic pose when he's holding the shotgun above his head. I'm like, that's from Army of Darkness. That's not from Evil Dead 2. Hail to the king, baby. Give me some sugar. All these famous lines, they're all from Army of Darkness.
Shop smart, shop smart. Because there's no allusion in this film to the fact that he was just working in a convenience store. But in number 3, they go full hog to the fact that this guy pretty much can be classed as a loser in any other time.
Yeah, well, a perfect example is one you brought up before. When we did Weekend at Bernie's 1 and 2 back to back, Weekend at Bernie's 1 is far and away the best of the two films. Like, it's so much better than the second film. But a lot of the stuff people remember is actually from the sequel. And I think the exact same is true here. People are so, when they think of Evil Dead, they think of Evil Dead 2 because it's the better film. But when they think of moments, as you just did with the eye-poking scene, they often think of Army of Darkness. It's a weird kind of relationship between the two films, especially as Army of Darkness. I mean, that really isn't a horror comedy at all. That's a horror comedy, horror epic. Jesus Christ, we're getting
that
into...
goes more towards the action comedy horror thing, I think.
Well, I think it's like... you would never call Jason the Argonauts a horror film. I mean, at that point, are we talking a comedy fantasy epic? I mean, that's kind of what, with tiny hints of horror. I don't know. We'll get to that in Legacy anyway. Let's
unpack one of my favorite scenes, which is the hand scene, because we've already said that it was improvised by Bruce Campbell and improvised very well, because they did the first take and they just kept the first, like, no, we're not doing it again. That's fine. I don't think we should smash any more plates over your head. But it's like, even the after he's knocked out and the hand is just going,
it's brilliant.
Like, it looks perfect. Like, there is an actual, like, the hand is on its own, but it's attached, so it is dragging the full-on unconscious body of Bruce Campbell, and it's done so well, and it's acting. And then you can mock Bruce Campbell's acting a lot in quite a few, but the physical side of Bruce Campbell's acting is fantastic.
Yeah, and as I said, it's a nod to a kind of like so much of this film, a nod to a bygone era. I think I mentioned the names earlier, Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. He almost feels, and again, even his looks, feels like a star of the kind of like before talkies, what would you call it? Silent movies. Jesus fucking Christ! Before I just had that kind of turn. I was like, before talkies, they were in these movies. So in many respects, like that kind of early cinema, silent movies, and even obviously going into the talkies era, when physical comedy was so much more of a thing. And he feels like a throwback actor in that regard. And as I said, it's easy to kind of take physical comedy for granted. And it's only when you see bad physical comedy that you realize not only how important it is and how hard it is. It's kind of like Rowan Atkinson in Mr. Bean. It's the reason Mr. Bean plays in every country in the world, because it's all physical comedy. And the reason you don't see many film shows like it is because not many people can do it. And that hand scene in particular is when we picked up, my wife and I, when we were watching it, it was just the gene, like there's no special effects. It's just him dragging himself across the floor. But you really do get that feeling that his hand is working totally independent of the rest of his body. Yes. And the fact that his hand is kind of giggling maniacally, it doesn't make any sense. You don't care because you're so on board for the scene. And so much of it is, if Bruce Campbell couldn't sell the physical action and comedy of this film, it would flat out fall on his ass. Yeah. Of course, a big part of it is Sam Raimi's ambitious, inventive, and often spectacular direction. But if you don't have Bruce Campbell in this role, it doesn't work. It flat out doesn't work.
That scene ends as well with another question about how much blood can be in something. Because how much blood is in just one single hand after he shoots him in the wall, and it just pisses out.
They really do go overboard with that. And it's like, red blood, black blood, everything. The blood goes back. He dries it off very quickly. Does it make sense? No. Does it look awesome? Yeah, it was like every time they came to that question, like, does this make, don't worry about it. It's like the only question was, does this look cool? And is it going to make Bruce Campbell very upset? If the answer is yes to both, we forge ahead. Yeah, I think so.
I tell you what else looked great in this was when Annie's boyfriend, who I'm pretty sure wasn't even named in this film, because I missed his name.
I'm not aware of his name.
No. When he was possessed and he's floating above, and you've got this wide angle shot of him floating. You got Henrietta just with her head sticking out of the trapdoor, and he's moving around and his hands are up, and he said, like, we are the things that were before and will be again, and he's doing all this stuff. It's done so well. I am like, all right, it's dated now, but I think that was just, it was really good. Like back then, I thought that was really good.
I think it looks really cool. And again, there's elements that every so often, that's one of the scenes where it almost looks like a stage show.
That out as I did that, and I hurt my neck.
Yeah, you did it really well, by the way. Like the head moves, I wasn't going to mention it, but dude, you fucking really sold that, in fairness. But there are scenes in this, and that's a perfect example, where the camera cuts away, you see the whole film, and it's very much kind of straight on, no fuss, no muss, no fancy camera tricks. And it looks, excuse me, like a stage production. And I was watching it, and there's another scene in particular where I could say, Ash is falling over, and so, like, that could be any scene, of course, but it's shot in the same way. And it made me think, it's like, this would totally work as a stage play.
Yes.
Like, why hasn't Evil Dead, the stage show, gone to the West End of London yet? It just feels like this would be the perfect, you have one set, and it's just physical and visual mayhem for like an hour and a half, and then everyone goes home happy. Of course, how'd you deal with all the blood, I suppose? That could be quite tricky, because I think that one scene where all the blood in particular comes out of the wall, they shot that last because it ostensibly ruined the set. They're like, this is going to fuck the set, the scene. So it's got to be the last thing we actually shot in the film. But yeah, it can feel quite staged at times. And that scene in particular, almost like if you had a somewhat macabre sense of humor or macabre taste in art, you could almost have that scene framed. It's so perfectly set, as you say, with Henrietta coming out of the floor and him floating in the air. It just looks so. It was almost like you saw it. It's like, this almost looks like an evil postcard. Let's just film it as we see it. But yeah, it does make me kind of wish for a stage show, which may well never happen. If they could do
a Beetlejuice stage show, they turned that into a musical, then I'm pretty sure they could do the Evil Dead, because the Evil Dead, like Beetlejuice, is pretty much set in one location.
Yeah. But I guess it's the same problem. It's like, can you do it without Bruce Campbell, I suppose? But God knows. I'm sure someone could do a half-decent Bruce Campbell impression for a stage show.
Yeah.
And would you have songs?
Yeah.
I feel like this film, if you put it on stage and you threw in a handful of songs, it wouldn't feel out of place.
No.
It was just like, yeah, why not? Get fucking songs in there.
All you've got to do is get a prosthetic chin, and you've got a Bruce Campbell. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And look, he's got one of those faces. Like, if you ask me, it's like, do I think Bruce Campbell would be a good singer? I'm like, I bet he is. I bet he fucking is. I bet you he is. Again, he ticks all the movie star boxes. I bet cash money he's a great singer. But yeah, it's one of those films, like, it's a remake, it's a sequel. You're still, even when it becomes a sequel, you're still kind of in many respects basically rehashing what happened in the first film. But eventually, what you get at the end is Sam Raimi saying, if this is a success, I'm going to paint myself and the producers into a corner by having him go back in time through a portal for no apparent reason to medieval time, just because he wanted to make a Ray Harryhausen style medieval epic. And he makes sure at the end of this film, it's like, okay, I've made the film you want, but I'm having this at the end. It's going to end with Ash in medieval times. And if you want to make another film, it's going to have to be the one I want to make. And it's genius, the fact that he's just like, he just says, okay, well, now if this makes the money back or is financially successful, which it obviously was, there's no more options. We're not doing the cabin again. We're doing my one. And
it wasn't even
totally
the ending,
gets away with it.
It wasn't even the ending, because they threw that in halfway through when they opened the book, and the book had the picture of Ash holding his hand chainsaw. It wasn't meant to, like, obviously he didn't know it was Ash at the time. They called him the hero that came from before, or the hero that came from above.
Was that in the Necronomicon Ex Mortis? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or one of the missing pages that she had. I can't remember where it was, but yeah, in those pages, and they said, it's translated as it's the hero that saved them from the Deadites that came from above.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta be honest, I'm amazed anyone's opening this book, the Book of the Dead. I mean, the name,
it's called the Book of the Dead, and
it's got a face on it.
Yes.
It's got a fucking face on it. I'm not dealing with it.
Films with Brendan Fraser. That fucking book is called The Book of the Dead. Stop reading from these fucking books.
It's so, again, it kind of speaks to like the split tone of the film of where it's going. It's like, we mentioned already that they don't actually mention the Deadites until the very end of the film. And funny enough, when they actually go back to the Middle Ages, and suddenly it's like, oh, this is the film that Sam Raimi wanted to make. Like, before that, it almost feels like references like you find in The Exorcist, like the Castle of Cantar and the Kandarian demons. It all sounds very legit in its own way, whereas Deadites, you're like, all right, this is a different film, a different tone, and we're off to the fucking races. And that is exactly like, the three films, again, take out those first 6 minutes where they're ostensibly remaking the first film. It never stops. The three films, there's no gap in the action.
Yeah.
It's like the first film ends, it goes straight to Ash getting his ass thrown through the forest, and it's straight off to the races again for part 2 at the cabin. And then he goes back to medieval times, and the third film basically starts with him again, the boomstick scene with everyone there, and again with a much bigger budget, obviously, much more visually impressive.
They kind of changed it, don't they? The third film, we'll cover more in Legacy, but at the end of number 2, they like hail to the guy and all that stuff. But in the third film, when it begins, it's like, oh no, you must be a Deadite. Let's just kick the shit out of you and then throw you in as well. So, because
everyone kicks in the shot. That's just one of the things. Like, he gets his ass kicked by the Deadites. The people show up at the cabin. They kick his ass. He goes back to medieval times in the third film. They kick his ass. Like, he spends so much time getting his ass kicked.
I mean, in all fairness,
but he takes a beating well.
They kick the shit out of him in the cabin because he winged Bobby Joe. Now, I'm sorry. He shot through with a buckshot through the cabin door, and he literally winged her. Like, she had a scrape on her. If it's buckshot, she is riddled.
Yeah, she probably would have got a little bit worse than that. But I'm not sure how that works in the same way. If you come in and she's dead, I think it's harder to kind of bridge the gap between Ash and these characters. Yeah. If he's just shot Jake's girlfriend in the face with buckshot and she's dead, I'm just not sure if they get there.
I wouldn't be surprised with this film, by the way. I wouldn't be surprised if they would have done that as well. Because if they would have done that, you'd be, Evil Dead. I mean, everything that's going on, you wouldn't be shocked. I tell you what did shock me is after they do the whole kit-up scene, which again, I've mentioned previously, I fucking love a kit-up scene.
This is one of the best.
I love a scene like in Commando where he kits himself up, and in this one, where he does the chainsaw. And
it's not quite Commando, but it's in the same ballpark. It's in that kind of.
What surprised me is the fact he could take a chainsaw and cut through metal perfectly to make himself a sawn-off shotgun.
Yeah. Again, it's all in it's just about looking cool. And then, of course, when he cuts his own shotgun to make a sawn-off shotgun with the chainsaw attached to his hand, it's like, yeah, dude, that's fucking badass. And that's what maybe tips the scale. About how good that tool-up scene is. Sorry,
when he cut it, and then he elbows it off.
Oh, dude, he's so bad. And again, it comes back to that whole point. There is no character who is simultaneously as goofy, as buffoonish as Ash, but somehow at the same time so endlessly cool. Yeah. It's like, if you've got like that look, and especially even after he gets into a fight, it's like the left sleeve gets pulled off. It just looks perfect, doesn't it? Yeah. It's like, he's been working out. He's got the chainsaw for the other hand. He's got the sawn-off shotgun, which he's sawn off himself with his own chainsaw hand. He just looks so cool. But he's also a complete dick. And that is leaned into more, as you say, in the other films and in the TV show, is that he really is a buffoon. But don't get me wrong, he is heroic and he's brave as fuck, but he's also quite inept. It's like he scrapes through on goodwill and application. Yes. Like that is, the one thing I'll say about, Ash Williams is like he applies himself all the time, 100%. A for effort, all that jazz. But yeah, still a bit of a buffoon all the same. So I just find it weird, before we kind of move on from the film, and I don't find it weird at all, actually, because we've already spoken about how much this is an Ash movie, is the fact that we've hardly mentioned Sarah Berry as Annie, or Casey Wesley DePavia as Bobby Joe, or Dan Hicks as Jake. It's like, they're almost like you say, they're there just to kind of keep the narrative dribbling over, just to provide a body count of some persuasion. Yes. But it's so about Ash, it's ridiculous.
Well, if you haven't watched the film, you ask somebody to name one of the other characters in Evil Dead 2, and they're probably going to go, the guy with no teeth. Or
yeah, that's about it, isn't it?
Yeah, or the blonde guy. You're going to name their attributes. You're not going to name the character.
No. I couldn't remember even, you would say the second lead is Annie, isn't it? But she's a weird one. She kind of goes off the handle pretty quick without. She tries to kill Ash a lot, and even when she meets at the bridge with Bobby Joe and Jake, it's like she's aggressive immediately. It's like, fucking chill out, dude. She's a bit much, but she's the closest thing this movie has to a second lead. But it's so far from where Ash is as the leading man. It's almost ridiculous. You could cut them out of the film and almost be like, well, you could still have largely the same film. But yeah,
I understand that we need to move on, but there is one question that has been burning in while I watch it, and I haven't missed it. What the fuck happened to Professor Nobi?
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
You see him floating around. He says, "Save my soul."
Yeah.
What happened to him? Where did he go? Where's his body? What the fuck?
I assume they both swallowed his soul and his body. That's all I can think, is that, they keep saying, I swallowed your soul, because he's like, save my soul and save your own lives or whatever. That, again, that's another real throwback scene. It's almost to me, it looks like, the Seventh Seal kind of thing. Is that the film, The Seventh Seal? Yeah. It has that kind of vibe. I assume that's all I can think, was that he was both eaten and that his soul was consumed by the evil, by the Deadites. So he's kind of in Deadite limbo or whatever. But again, I assume they just kind of thought, it'd be cool to have this kind of scene in it, to have this kind of visual nod, motif, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, again, so much in this film, they don't spend a lot of time asking why. That's never. They're just like, can we? The answer is yes, let's do it. So yeah, it's I don't think it's particularly important, but I'm just going to go with he was both eaten figuratively and literally, as it were.
Fair enough.
Should we go to facts?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. This is usually your domain. I've got a few.
We've mentioned a couple anyway, so I'm probably just going to be stepping on a couple that we've mentioned, but I'll rattle through these.
Mm-hmm.
So, during the scene where the severed head of Linda bites Ash's hand, Bruce Campbell says the single line, "work shed." This line was later redubbed in post-production due to the quality of the audio, giving it a strange, slightly disproportionate sound to the audio. This is why I brought this fact up. I like this. 9 years later, while filming his cameo in Escape from L.A., your favorite film,
Love that film.
the first thing Kurt Russell said to Bruce Campbell on the set was jokingly, "Say work shed."
That's awesome.
We've already mentioned that Stephen King was a huge fan of Evil Dead, and he convinced producer Dino De Laurentiis over dinner, who was producing King's Maximum Overdrive, to have his production company, DEG, De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, finance Evil Dead 2, which again, as you've already said, is why they couldn't get the rights to show any of Evil Dead 1, so they had to refilm it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the film was shot on set built inside the gymnasium of the J.R. Fison Junior High School in Wadesboro, North Carolina. The large demonic head Ash battles in the climax of the film, which the crew nicknamed the Rotten Apple Head, was too large and cumbersome for the crew to carry back to California, so it was left in North Carolina and soon disappeared. Its whereabouts were unknown for a number of years until it was found in a Halloween haunted house attraction just outside the original shooting location of Wadesboro, North Carolina. I love that.
Amazing.
So some guy, like, we need something for our haunted house, and it's just randomly, oh, look what we found by here. Like,
holy shit. I mean, of all the people to find this, me, the owner, a proprietor of a haunted house, what are the odds? I suspect maybe there were a few more steps before I got to the ownership. But I love to think that he was just taking a walk with his wife and his dog, maybe in the woods, and found a giant head and went, well, this feels like it was made to be, you know?
The recap of The Evil Dead includes a shot, where the evil force runs through the cabin and rams into Ash. When this shot was filmed, Bruce Campbell suffered a broken jaw when Sam Raimi, who was operating the camera, crashed into him with a bicycle. Or, so people were led to believe. This was a story concocted by Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell as a gag to see how many people would believe it actually happened.
Why not? Build up a legend around the film. That's always a good idea.
Ash's chainsaw appears to switch hands in one scene. This is because Sam Raimi decided Ash would walk the opposite way across the room in that scene, so he flipped the negative.
Yeah, like you can see, like the scar on his face is on the wrong side, obviously, and then he just goes and picks up something with his right hand, which doesn't exist.
Which, as we've already said with this film, doesn't feel out of place for what this film is.
No, and like you said, like that's a perfect example of like, he knew, obviously, it was going to look wrong, but it was just like, this looks cooler, so I don't give a shit. Like, yeah, it all feels back to the whole, like, as long as it looks awesome, as long as it's fun, we're just going to go with it.
I love this one. The smoke that comes from the chainsaw is actually tobacco smoke. Sam Raimi rigged tube into the back of the chainsaw, hid off camera, and blew cigarette smoke through the tube to create the effect.
Gotta love the 80s. Gotta love the 80s.
I love it as he's meant to be moving this thing around, and you got Sam Raimi just going...
Just taking a puff, yeah.
Right, this is a long one. Many scenes were deleted from the movie, and according to official reports, all of them and the original versions of the movie are lost. Some of these scenes are Henrietta is in her rocking chair while the professor reads the incantations. Her demonic eyes are unveiled in a cabin's light. Linda's severed head throwing a black bile on Ash when trapped in the vice, which is why black slime suddenly appears around her mouth in the final scene.
Oh, yeah.
Linda's severed head extending its long snake-like tongue into Ash's mouth while in the rocking chair. And an extended take of the blood flood with green and yellow blood. I love this called the blood flood.
The blood flood, yeah. Well, I'm not sure at what point it just becomes a blood flood, but it's definitely long before that scene finishes, that's for damn sure.
An extended sequence of the half-headed Ed running after the characters and eventually is chopped to pieces with its body parts flopping on the floor. There you go. Mm-hmm. So his name was Ed.
Ed. Good old Ed. Good old forgettable Ed.
A possessed Ash eating a squirrel as he runs after Annie.
Oh, no. Well, I'm glad that was cut out.
No, Ash eating a squirrel. Running after Annie, he's just chomping on a squirrel.
Yeah. I don't buy into it. You know how hard it would be to catch a squirrel? I don't give a fuck if you're dead or not. It's not happening.
Ash's demonic face morphing back to normal after taking his dead girlfriend's necklace. Mm-hmm. And then, so a couple more. The rat scene on the stairs over Bruce Campbell's shoulder whilst he's locked in the cellar was nicknamed Senor Cojones by the crew.
Senor Cojones?
Yeah.
See.
In a visual pun, one of the books on the can that traps Ash's possessed hand is Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms.
Yeah, that is not a subtle nod, should we say?
No.
The camera kind of sits on it for like a good 2 seconds. Like, do you get it yet? Do you get the joke? About the hand, right? Yeah, okay, yeah. I've got it, dude.
The eyeball swallowing shot was actually filmed in reverse. So she started off with the eyeball in her mouth and then spat it out.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That seems so hokey, and it comes after like we were saying earlier about the Henrietta scene, where you get that sense like, oh, this is truly like a horror scene. Like that's the closest thing in the film to like a straight up horror scene, and it's followed immediately by the eyeball in the mouth. Like it's just like, all right, we don't want to go too far with the horror. Let's really make this ridiculous.
Which is what I said in my introduction. Like they went full on with the slapstick in this one. They flirted with her in the first one, but they went full on with this one.
Oh yeah, this is a completely different beast.
We mentioned the glove belonging to Freddy Krueger can be seen hanging above the door of the tool shed when Ash carves his girlfriend's head with a chainsaw. And when he's looking for the pages in the cellar scenes, this was in response to the use of the Evil Dead on a television screen in A Nightmare on Elm Street. So that's good because they used I think that's when Johnny Depp got killed. He was watching the Evil Dead.
Yeah, it's the Johnny Depp scene. Yeah.
Which again was quite funny because the amount of blood that Johnny Depp spurts out in that film.
Mm-hmm. It's such a beloved film. It's like people, isn't it Donnie Darko? Don't they go to the cinema and watch Evil Dead 2?
I think so, yeah. I've only seen Donnie Darko once, so.
Oh, dude, that film's dope. Doesn't matter anyway.
The scene, and lastly, for me at least, the scene where Ash is doused in blood coming from the wall was filmed by Bruce Campbell horizontally on the floor and then pouring gallons of fake blood on him from above. The scene was filmed with the camera turned 90 degrees to create the illusion that he was standing upright. So much blood was dumped on Campbell that not only did he feel like he was nearly drowning, he would also produce red snot for the next 2 weeks every time he blew his nose.
Lovely. Just lovely. As I said, that guy was put through the ringer. To
make matters worse, his insistence that authentic Caro syrup formula was used to simulate the blood made him a target for every fly around.
Yeah, especially, again, we're talking 100-degree heat as well. That can't have been fun at all.
That's me for facts. I don't know if you've got any more.
Just for you, the original Linda from the 1981 Evil Dead declined to return as she was pregnant. Billy Joe was bizarrely written as a role for Holly Hunter, which would have been fantastic. I think that's just down to her accent.
I saw this one, but I couldn't understand the end part of it, so I kind of skipped it. Can you understand the end part of it?
The what, sorry?
Oh, you've only got the Holly Hunter part, have you?
Yeah. Okay. That's the only bit I've got.
There was a scene that, because he was meant to be Bobby Joe, but there was something about he wanted her as Bobby Joe because he leered at her when she came back because they were roommates or something, and she was actually she auditioned to be a hooker in something, so she was wearing hooker getup, and when he leered at her or something, like, I didn't get where it was.
Was it like a guilt thing? Like he leered at her, then he suddenly realised who it was, and he's like, "Oh, to make up for it, I'll kind of hire you into my movie."
But the fact said that he made her feel uncomfortable, and then it went on with, he wanted Holly Hunter for the film. I didn't know where that fact was going. It kind of confused the hell out of me.
I don't. Well, I literally I think I stopped reading at Holly Hunter because I love Holly Hunter, and I think she has like one of the best Southern drawls in movie history. Yes. So I would have loved to have seen her as Bobby Joe, but obviously it wasn't meant to be. Dan Hicks was supposedly cast as Jake because he could remove his tooth. Like, that's as good a reason as any, I suppose.
That's why they had Cowboy Bob, wasn't it, in Deliverance?
Yeah.
Because he had no teeth, so they just had him as a hillbilly.
It's like, this dude has no teeth. He's perfect. This is fantastic. There's a censored version of the Evil Dead, and it's literally called the Evil Dead Severely Edited for TV version. And supposedly, the only way you can see it now is a Spanish dub version. That's the only version that exists of the original made-for-TV cut of this film. So, if you're really keen on seeing a largely edited version in Spanish, it's out there. I'm not that big a fan.
No, I'm good. Yeah.
You might have noticed at the start and both at the end of the credits, a reference to Rosebud Releasing Corporation. The reason you would have never seen that before or since is because it didn't exist. It was created by De Laurentiis Entertainment Group as they had like a legal agreement with the rating board, the MMPA or MPA, whatever the hell it's called, that they wouldn't release anything R-rated. So to do so, they basically just made up a production company called Rosebud Releasing Corporation, which I thought was pretty cool. Because I remember seeing it at the start, I was like, yeah, it's so distinctive. I was like, I can't remember having seen it before. And that is the reason, because it was made up for that. And I think that's pretty much it. Usually we kind of go straight to the soundtrack, and it's one of those weird ones. The score was composed by Joseph LaDuca, who scored all 3 movies and the TV show. He's done a bunch of other TV shows you would have heard of. He did the movie My Name is Bruce. I'm not sure if you've seen that one with Bruce Campbell.
I've seen that one, yeah.
But I'm not sure if it's the same for you, but the score didn't really stand out for me, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No.
But when I think of the Evil Dead series, the score never really sticks in my head as something.
It's the piano. That's the only tune that I can remember from this film. Is the piano scene.
Well, I think a big part of it is that kind of like, it's supposed to feel a little bit throwback. If nothing else, it always feels kind of tone perfect, as it were, for the film. Like, you know, it can kind of get like cheesily romantic, but then it turns it up to like, you know, 11 to kind of coincide with the action. So there's obviously a reason that they've kept this guy around for all 3 films and the TV show, is that he's captured the tone of the movies. And even though there's not a kind of signature tune or signature, you know, piece of music that people associate with this film, it definitely captures the energy of the film. So, you know, obviously the reason he's stuck around, but I can't say I know much else about Joseph Liduca's work, so I'm not going to go into too much detail there. We've kind of skirted around legacy. I mean, obviously, you know, this film was a big success. The series, if anything, has become it's such a cult trilogy. It's become a bigger success in the years since its release. I mean, now there's toys, there's, you know, board games, there's everything for Evil Dead. There's T-shirts, there's merchandise at the yin yang, as it were. But I think it all comes back to the quality of Evil Dead 2. That is the kind of the building blocks for the franchise, as it were. Like, even though we already mentioned that, you know, the sequel, a lot of the memorable lines come from that film. I think tonally and everything about Evil Dead really does harken back to Evil Dead 2 in terms of tone, aesthetics, the whole kit and caboodle, even Ash himself, I think. And I think the danger with Army of Darkness and the show afterwards is by leaning that much further into Ash's buffoonery, I'm not sure if I like the character quite as much in those films. I feel like they get the balance right. Just, you know, the balance is perfect in Evil Dead 2, I think.
But it asks that question as well, because there was a remake in 2013 called Evil Dead. And then there's actually a sequel to there's another film coming in next year called Evil Dead Rise, which is they find the Necronomicon in a high-rise building, and then the demons take over the high-rise building.
And that is with Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell.
I'm not too sure. I think Sam Raimi is producing. I don't think Bruce Campbell is in it.
I thought they were doing Evil Dead 4.
Campbell confirmed that he would reprise his role as Ash, while Raimi later additionally signed the project as director. So maybe Ash is coming back. But
yeah. That's
but now it says here it's directed by Lee Cronin. So as I look at it, there's nothing in regards to...
Oh, I'm not sure. I just remember the last thing I saw about it was that they confirmed that they were making an Evil Dead 4. I didn't know anything about a high-rise, just that they were going to make it. But then when I looked at IMDb, there was nothing for Bruce Campbell or Sam Raimi confirming that it was officially in production. But supposedly, Evil Dead 4 is supposed to be a thing. And, you know, like you said, the remake was very much a remake of the first film. It was a straight-up horror film.
That was my question. I was going to... because you said like it goes into his buffoonery with the TV show and Army of Darkness, but do they suffer from not having an Ash character in this remake?
Well, no, because it's completely different. If you have Ash in it, it's a different film. Like, this is a straight, and don't get me wrong, it's not a fantastic film, but it's a decent horror film. It's perfectly fine. But it's, like I said, it's more a remake of the first film. It's kind of like, all right, we're going to take the Evil Dead premise and we're largely going to take it very seriously. Yeah. And I think they kind of had to, because I don't think you can remake Evil Dead as it is without Bruce Campbell. I think you either go do something completely different, which they did in an odd way by almost remaking the first film in terms of tone. But if you're going to have Bruce Campbell in it, then it's got to be a continuation. You don't remake, although they did remake Evil Dead. The semantics become so confusing when talking about the Evil Dead in terms of remakes and sequels and all that jazz. But, you know, the remake, the official remake, as it were, was what if we took this premise and took it a lot more seriously and turned it into a full-on traditional horror in 2011 or when it was released. It's like, okay, fine, it worked okay. But without that Sam Raimi magic, without a Bruce Campbell, it just becomes a kind of slightly by-the-numbers horror film. Whereas if you're going to keep the series running now, I think you've got to bring Ash back. The only thing is there's been so much of him now, and I think with the TV show, the TV show, for all intents and purposes, is actually very well made. And I know it's beloved by many, all 3 seasons of it, in fact. But to me, it's like by spending that much more time with Ash, he has to become more and more of a buffoon. Like, I don't need to spend. It's kind of like we were talking about, Karate Kid with Cobra Kai. Like, I know people love that TV show. And I started watching the TV show and I was like, oh, this is really good. But I quickly realized it's not a story that I want to spend 20, 30 hours with. And it's the same with Evil Dead and Ash. It's like, I love seeing him in movies, especially in something like Evil Dead, where it's like, it doesn't give you time to breathe. It's like, you have time to think. It's straight to the races. I don't need to spend 20, 30 hours with Ash. It's just not that kind of character. So maybe that's why I despite loving the original trilogy, I couldn't really get into the TV show in the same way. But, I do hope there is an Evil Dead 4, though. I'm all for another film in the series, for sure.
All right, so unpacking quite a few points on what you just said. Firstly, you said Evil Dead 4. I'm just reading now. Ash Campbell has claimed that he's retired from the role of Ash, so it looks.
Oh, fair enough.
Okay. So you're not going to get an Evil Dead 4, but never say never, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough.
In regards to like the whole character of Ash, you don't want to see like 20, 30 hours of him. One of the best iterations of the Ash character actually is in a comic called Freddy versus Jason versus Ash.
Brilliant.
Yeah, which is absolutely like it's. Freddy has taken over the world. I think I read it years ago. And he's managed to come back from the dreams, but he's got his own army now, and he's like in Washington DC, and Ash has to team, and just Jason's just wandering around kind of thing. But it's a very good comic.
Jason's just wandering around. Such a Jason thing, isn't it? Jason's just wandering around killing people. That's just what Jason does, isn't it?
I'm not really selling it. But when I'm
going to look into it. Jason versus Freddy versus Ash. Sounds, it sounds like my kind of comic book.
Yeah, honestly, it is a great comic. So if you ever get a chance to read it, I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, in terms of video games, because obviously that kind of touches upon the legacy as well, is the fact that it doesn't have a great legacy in terms of video games. I mean, there was an Evil Dead game in 1984. What's that?
Bless them, they
have tried. I mean, there was one early doors in 1984 for the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum, but that is rough. Other than an intro screen which has Henrietta on it, for the most part, it doesn't really look like an Evil Dead game. There's kind of hints, but it's basically a top-down, very Spectrum-looking adventure game, so you can forget all about that. There was Evil Dead Hail to the King on the PlayStation 1, which was a truly terrible sequel to Army of Darkness. So it was interesting what they were trying to do narratively, but terrible game. Evil Dead, A Fistful of Boomstick, that was for the PS2 and Xbox. That was more of a hack and slash game. Again, largely rubbish. I remember playing that one. Evil Dead Regeneration in 2005, again for the PS2 and original Xbox. Again, very action-oriented again. Slightly better, but still not amazing. Although there is hope for the sequel.
Is that the one that had like little baby Ash or something? There was like a little character that ran around with a bone.
I cannot remember. It was years ago. I remember playing these games very briefly and being like, they're not for me, and just moving on very quickly. So it might well be, but I can't remember. Although the new one by Saber Interactive, the company who made World War Z, which is a game which is totally worth playing if you get a chance, their Evil Dead game actually looks quite promising. So it's got like co-op and player versus player kind of action where you take control of either, heroes in the Evil Dead universe, or you can take control of the evil, as it were, and possess players to kind of fight against the kind of co-op heroes. So that one actually looks quite interesting. It's not the kind of game I necessarily want to see. I would actually, and dare I say, prefer to see a kind of Sony first-party mega-budget Evil Dead game by, say, Naughty Dog, perhaps. But, that's the kind of game I'd like to see. But I think, obviously, this looks relatively promising. So I'm going to hold my breath and hope that it turns out pretty good.
So... Well, it does look good. You're right. It's coming out in February next year, 2022. So I will be maybe not picking it up straight away, but checking to see if it's going to be worth a look.
Yeah, totally.
So there are two how I would want to see it. Yeah, and yes, it depends on the kind of pacing that you'd want this game to go. So for me, it's one of two. It depends what you want to see in the game, really. Like, if you want story-driven, it's Naughty Dog, because I'm sorry, they did fantastic with Last of Us. But and
that gameplay would fit as well. That kind of like, you can go all action or you can be sneakier. But yeah, I think as always, I feel like I'm being a bit greedy going for someone like Naughty Dog. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Because for Naughty Dog, and I had a text message off a friend the other day, he said, I love how you're 30 episodes in and you're still plugging Naughty Dog. But
I know, it's ridiculous.
But no, it's because it's the story with them. They're always story driven for me. And I'm a story focused person. Mm-hmm. I don't like collecting 100 feathers in games. I don't like bloody traveling 900 miles to get a flute or whatever these fucking games are these days. I
love those games. Yeah. I love those games. That's why I'm not a Naughty Dog guy. Yeah,
I just want to play the story. So if you want a story driven game of Ash, you go you go Naughty Dog. But if you want more primarily focused on a bit of action with some intense scenes and things like that, I think Capcom did quite well with Resident Evil, especially the original, and the remake that they've done with Resident Evil now. But to me, I mean, I'm going to go more towards Naughty Dog than I would Capcom. But I think,
well, yeah, it's a weird thing because we're talking about the developer, but so much of it depends on what kind of game, and not only the kind of game, but tonally what you want to go for.
Yeah,
it's like when I was thinking Naughty Dog in the first instance, I was thinking a kind of big sprawling first person adventure where you do very much play as Ash and you're going through history, fighting the Deadites from one place to another, and it becomes this big sprawling epic of action. And you could always be like, yes, there's horror, but it's leaning more into the kind of Army of Darkness style that he could end up at any point in history fighting the Deadites. But I think you've got a great point with Capcom. If you're going to go a bit more horror, but still, let's not forget, especially the earlier Resident Evil games, right up until 4, 5, stuff like that, even though, excuse me, those are horror games, they are quite goofy. They've got quite goofy dialogue, quite goofy characters. So if you're going more for a kind of maybe a slightly smaller story, I would, and maybe more action-oriented, I'd go for Capcom. But very much in the vein of their earlier Resident Evils, not their more recent ones. I was thinking, perhaps it's because it's maybe my favorite game of all time, something like Resident Evil 4. You think of that village, the Spanish village, you could kind of just replace that with, a village in medieval England. And you're playing as Ash rather than Leon Kennedy, and you just lean slightly more into the humor. It's those films are kind of those games are horror first with hints of almost kind of B comedy. And again, you could argue, is it intentional or not? Whereas if you make an Evil Dead game, you kind of have to go more intentional with the comedy. But I don't think it's a million miles away from that. And the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, no, I kind of now want to see Capcom make a Resident Evil 4, but with Ash. Once again, I'm going to go with your option because I think that's the better one.
I'm doing quite well.
All I want to see is Resident Evil 4. I almost feel like you could make a Resident Evil 4 mod.
Yes.
But with Ash and just kind of change a few minor details, and you'd have the perfect Evil Dead game for sure.
Usually call you the video game guy, but you've kind of jumped on my bandwagon the last few weeks.
No, you're coming up with a much better idea. So balls to me. I'm talking absolute nonsense. I just can't get Naughty Dog out of my head. It's ridiculous.
I wonder who got that there.
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows what bastard did that?
I'm sorry. It's really just cut out then.
Well, your brain. It did look like you kind of half turned off.
Yeah, my brain short-circuited. My brain just rebooted. That's ridiculous.
I think it's one of those. It's that end of the podcast thing. It's like, do we have anything to say, or are we just going to go to scores and recommendations? I think we are at scores and recommendations.
Yeah, we've covered all our sections, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah, we've done everything. It's fine. So, you've already said basically your score. I mean, you've already said you love this film.
Yeah. So I love this film. It is.
There it is again.
There it is. Yeah, it's a 4-star film. I do love it. It's a great film. It misses out on a 5-star because you can't give everything 5, but it is a 4-star film. But this is the conundrum of would you recommend it to others? And again, as we said on a previous previous episodes, this isn't the kind of film that you would just willy-nilly recommend to others.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, I totally agree. I'm actually 4-star as well. It's not far away from a 5-star movie. I mean, I do really love it, but I'm going to go with 4 stars as well. I don't think I need to overly justify, between it being great and a masterpiece or whatever. It's a really, really good film. I still love it to this day. 4 stars, that's fine. the recommendation part, same as you, is much trickier. As much as I enjoy it, it's not the kind of film I would just go recommend to anyone. Because we were talking before the podcast actually started. This is the kind of film where if you told me you adored it, if this was your favorite film of all time, I would understand. I would literally understand if you say it was your favorite film of all time. I suspect for some people it is their favorite movie of all time. But equally, if you would watch this and said, I think it's a piece of shit, I'd also understand that. It's not for everyone, this film. You're either on board with the tone and the vibe or you're not. I feel like it's almost... There's going to be very few people who are going to be middle of the road. There's not going to be many people who say, oh, this film was okay. You're either going to be like, I didn't get it, I thought it was rubbish, or I adore it. We're obviously on the closer to the end of the adoration end of the spectrum.
Yes.
But I have a lot of friends say, I always think of like the guys in work who aren't all massive movie fans. And it's like, would I recommend this film to those guys? Absolutely not. I wouldn't. I always feel like you need to have a foot in the kind of genre to a certain extent. Like if one of my friends was like a horror fan and he said like he hadn't seen Evil Dead 2, I was like, dude, you should totally watch Evil Dead 2. But if you're not a genre fan, I'm not sure if I'd recommend this.
No, not at all. Because you've basically just covered everything that I would have followed on with. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that you can't just you can never make anyone will do anything. You can't get people to watch. And if you explain this film, people are going to go, "Oh, that doesn't sound like something I'd want to watch."
Well, how much of this episode has been us talking about the semantics of remakes versus sequels and all these other things? Yeah. It's a weird sell, and it's almost like I feel like you could watch Evil Dead 2 on its own, of course, because it does remake the first one in the first 6 minutes. But I feel like 90% of the people who've seen Evil Dead 2 have probably watched the entire trilogy, who are probably totally all in on this film. Yeah. So again, I feel like this is one for genre aficionados, certainly one for movie fans. And I've got like a few friends who are kind of, not massive movie fans, but movie fans all the same. I'm like, yeah, if they hadn't seen it, I would say, oh, you should totally give this a go. It would still come with a caveat, even for those guys. It might not be for you, but you should give it a go. But as I said, my kind of, my friends who wouldn't consider themselves movie fans, they watch films, but they're not movie fans, whatever you want to, whatever the term might be. I wouldn't recommend this to them. I just totally wouldn't, as much as I love it.
No, totally agree with that. So in closing then, Evil Dead 2, we both give it a 4-star and we would recommend it to the right people. I'm good with that.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. We'll end the podcast as we always do with your pick. Well, not as we always do, as we always do with somebody's pick. So we'll end it with your pick. It's part 2 of our horror season, I would say, for Halloween.
Yeah. Of our Halloween double bill. And I've gone for a film which, considering that we are largely an 80s movie podcast, I know we do tiptoe into the 90s occasionally. I can't think of a much more 80s horror film, certainly for people of our age group in particular, than Poltergeist, which kind of, it feels like it ticks so many of the 80s boxes, that Amblin vibe, the whole Spielberg thing, everything about it. I was kind of torn between this and obviously maybe the more iconic, quote-unquote, movie monsters of the 80s, your Freddy Kruegers, your Jason Voorhees and stuff. But when I think of the 80s and I think of horror films, and especially for people our age, I think of Poltergeist, because a lot of people weren't necessarily allowed to watch Freddy Krueger in the 80s when we were younger. My parents were pretty cool with it, but I knew a lot of kids who weren't able to watch Freddy until the 90s when they were a bit older. But everyone, I felt like, watched Poltergeist. And, it's had a remake with... Well, we won't go into that. Watch Poltergeist. It's a really good film. It totally holds up. It's got that 80s magic, for lack of a better term.
Interesting you say everyone's watched this. I've watched it once.
Oh, well, it's going to be interesting.
7-year-old me forced to watch it by his brother, who developed a fear of clowns due to this film. So,
well, this is going to be a great return watch for you, for sure.
I mean, I will iterate that I am no longer afraid of clowns, but there was...
Oh, okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see how you feel after the rewatch.
So I've never seen it. I've seen it once in my life.
Yeah.
I do have an interesting story that I'll wait for next week in regards to a clown money box and my house. So I will...
Which may or may not end with somebody putting their finger in his ass. We'll see how that goes. But no, I actually, to make your point, I feel like this is a movie where a lot of people I know, myself included, watched this back in the 80s, early 90s, but they didn't watch it again. Like, they have these kind of like fond memories of it, but they haven't necessarily gone back and revisited it. And I'm not sure if it kind of lives as strongly in the popular culture as those aforementioned horror films from the 80s, Freddy, Jason, all that jazz. So again, I think it's a really interesting one to go back to. And I haven't seen this film for decades. So I'm actually really looking forward to this. Of course, I'd say that I picked it, but yeah. So like I said, if you get the opportunity, rewatch Poltergeist, but more importantly, please join us next week for part 2 of our Halloween special. But dude, as always, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks to everyone for listening, and see you next week. Cheers, bye.
Groovy.
Oh yeah, and before I forget, because I always forget, here's Rob telling you where you can actually find us.
Yeah, so we're currently on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Hey You Guys 80s or at Hey You Guys 80s. And we're also on email at heyyouguys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any emails, any recommendations, or any reviews you have. But whilst we're on about that, wherever you get your podcasts, please also smash the subscribe button. Yes, I said smash.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Leave us a review. And leave us some 5-star ratings as well, but make sure they're 5-star ratings.
Yeah. We're not interested in 1 star, 5-star. If it's not going to be 5-star, don't move smashing anything. Just leave your opinion to yourself. 5-star ratings only. But yeah, if you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. See you next week.